Stephen, thank you. That was the perfect setup. And you didn't know that as you were preparing your remarks, but it was the perfect setup to the rest of the day and a half that we have ahead of us. My remarks, my name is Deborah McMurray. I had the pleasure of co-chairing the Futures Conference with Steve and Susan and Ron and Karen. And I am so grateful that you're here, and I am so hopeful that this is a meaningful experience for you, especially as you interact with people that may be unfamiliar to you. Steve mentioned in his remarks that we had surveyed the conference attendees last year, and it was a very well appreciated conference, but one thing that was resounding in the comments that we received back was that people wanted more interaction. And because we have the 4 disciplines of law, accounting, technology, marketing, and the practice of law, is that it, Karen? I should know that off the top of my head. So the 4 disciplines represented in the room, we often do not have the opportunity to spend time with each other, and so we hope that this is the opportunity to do that. So we heard you, and other than Stephen's presentation where he had the stage all alone, we've created a TED Talk, a very traditional TED Talk format, and so we have 3 provocateurs, TED provocateurs, speaking about very lofty subjects. We've only given them 15 minutes, and in that traditional TED format, and each one is in the true spirit of TED. All of them are ideas worth spreading. So we hope as you are listening to the TED Talk that you are going to be tweeting, and that you have a whole sea of people that in a very viral way will be pushing this out further. So following each TED provocation, you will break into pre-assigned groups, and on the back of your name tags you have the group assignments, so you will be interacting with your name tag the next day and a half as well. And so you'll be in your pre-assigned groups, and they will be professionally facilitated by fellows, and I want to thank those of you who stepped up to handle this facilitation. It's going to make all the difference in the world. And your job as in these breakout sessions is to react to the provocation that you heard and discuss. And so you will consider a series of questions, explore alternatives, and then land on ideas that you want to advance to the broader audience. So after you have spent an hour together in your breakouts talking about the 3 TED Talks, you will return to this room, and the TED provocateur will then facilitate a discussion of the larger group, and will ultimately vote on those opinions, ideas that come and essentially that rise to the surface. So the facilitators have instructions for you as you get into your breakout sessions, but it should be a very lively discussion. And one thing I want to say is you will notice that we have not scheduled breaks for you, and it is your responsibility to take care of yourself and your needs, and whether you want to run down the hall or whether you have to make a phone call or check email or what it might be. If you have questions about the format today, if you're uncertain, please find Steve, Susan, Ron, Karen, or me, and we will be available, and we will also be circulating in the breakouts, and we'll be chatting and saying hello to our facilitator friends. So my next job, which is a huge treat for me, is to introduce our first TED provocateur, Lee Gibson. Many of you, and probably does not need introduction by many of you, but she is one of my closest friends, and I have admired Anne more in my career than almost anyone. I've learned so much from her, and I know you will as well. She is well known to most of us as essentially creating the idea of high-stakes competitions in law firms. And in her work with law firms, she has helped them win in new business more than $750 million worth of new business for her clients. She also created and essentially established the discipline of competitive intelligence inside law firms. Obviously, it's existed in industry, and it's been a very important aspect of industry and strategic planning and so on. But Anne is pretty much single-handedly started the conversation in the legal industry and has advanced it in a way that it's now something where we actually have CI professionals inside law firms. And they are sought after. So Anne was inducted as a fellow in 2006 into the college and was inducted into the Legal Marketing Association Hall of Fame in 2009. And so I want to introduce Anne and her topic, what is the market for legal services in the future from the buyer's point of view. So Anne, dear friend, it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you, Deborah. I'm fighting a bad back today, so I'm going to be sitting here behind the podium. Thanks, guys. Jared, can you hear me okay? That sounds good. This morning, I have come here to predict the future of the world. And fortunately, I have a whole 15 to 18 minutes to do so. Very briefly, let's just jump right into it. First, we're going to look at some global megatrends that are changing society and business in tremendous ways. These trends will impact every market and every industry that you serve. Then we're going to explore how these trends and forces are going to impact, in fact, already are impacting one very large industry that we serve, how it impacts that industry's markets and buyers and their legal needs. You have already heard, here we go. You've already heard how the future is changing, and here are some numbers to remind you of some of those changes that are happening. In 2010, the world's population was 6.9 billion people. In 2011, the corporate global 500 revenue was $30 trillion. Those are the 500 largest corporations in the world. In 2012, the gross domestic product growth in places like Angola and Thailand and Peru were 6, 7, 8%. By 2020, the world's population will be 7.7 billion. By 2020, the global 500 revenue will have doubled to $60 trillion. I'll also throw another statistic out at you, and that is that in 2000, 5% of the global 500 were founded in and grounded in emerging countries. By 2025, 50% of those global 500 will be in emerging countries. By 2030, the world's population will be 8.4 billion, and 60% of those folks will live in cities, be very urbanized. And for the first time in history, more than half of the people in the world will live above the poverty line. It's a very important thing to know for all kinds of reasons. The coming decades have been actually likened by a number of people to the French Revolution, a time that Charles Dickens wrote about in a way that seems really quite modern to me. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. So in our next era, we're going to have different leaders. We're going to have different nations in charge of things and younger generations and who are going to gain control. We will change, all of us, if we're alive, will change the way we live and work and even the way that we think. But as we consider these coming changes, just how stable have recent eras really been? I look around the room and I see a lot of people my age, but then I also see a few people who are a lot younger. Let's just look at what we've been through. Since World War II, the U.S. has been involved in armed conflicts in Asia, the Middle East, Europe, Africa, and Latin America. One U.S. president was assassinated and 2 others escaped assassination attempts. We suffered terrorist attacks in Oklahoma and New York. 625,000 Americans died of AIDS, and 1.2 million Americans are infected with the HIV virus. On the bright side, African Americans, women, and gays have gained in large measure the civil rights they had long been denied. It's a lot of change we went through. In post-war Europe, the change has been even more amazing. Countries rebuilt themselves dramatically. The 1950s brought the Cold War. The 60s saw Europe split by the Iron Curtain. In the 80s and the 90s, Europe experienced glasnost, German reunification, and USSR dissolution. And Eastern Europe was opened up to capitalism. Today, the European Union has 27 members, and 15 of them share a common currency. So there was a lot of change that happened there, too. Since the Great Depression, there have been 13 recessions, and I personally was in the workforce for 7 of those. During my career, I've had real careers, real good careers actually, in 3 very different industries. I've been hired by 10 institutions and companies. I've had at least a dozen temporary gigs, and for the last 16 years, I have been self-employed. And that's what stability looked like in the last era. Anybody else can relate to that? Every generation is imprinted by the circumstances and the mood of the world that they're born into. In this room, I know that there are 3 generations. The baby boomers among us, well, we rejected our parents' traditional values, and then we discovered sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and then we got jobs and spent the rest of our lives at the office. Now that we're discovering arthritis and retirement, we still think we're really special. But we also still are influenced and even suffer from the ideologies that we adopted in our youth. The Gen X's among you out there discovered Billy Idol, entrepreneurship, and work-life balance. You are less ideological than boomers, considerably so. You have more education. Some people think of you as the MTV generation. I think of you as the MBA generation. You are pragmatic, you take risks and solve problems, you start and manage businesses with confidence, and you get the job done. The Gen Ys out there, or millennials, you're special too. Your strong sense of community includes the whole world. You're the first digital natives. For you, virtual is real. Your first loyalty is to yourselves, not to institutions. Your process is experiential. I'm really looking forward to how your generation interacts with the legal project management types. I think that's going to be very interesting and maybe not as predicted. But we all face the same future. Every 5 years, the National Intelligence Council develops a report that describes the global trends and other forces that will influence the world over the next 15 to 20 years. These reports are widely used in planning exercises all over the globe. This latest report, which was published in December of last year, describes 4 global megatrends that will be enforced through 2030. And they're going to deepen and intertwine to create a world that none of us was born into. This is very startling to people my age and to people even in their 50s. The report also describes some other forces, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, that are going to they're going to interact with these global trends and are going to really, really drive them home. The first global megatrend is that of individual empowerment on steroids. This trend will accelerate substantially in the next 15 to 20 years due to poverty reduction, the increase in educational attainment, new communications and manufacturing technologies, the growing middle class, and better health care. This is the most important trend, and it is both a cause and effect of the other three trends, including the expanding global economy and the rapid growth of developing countries. Individuals will use their power to cause productive and destructive effects. The second trend is diffusion of power. Going forward, there will be no worldwide hegemonic power. Pax Americana is over. Real power will shift to networks and coalitions in a multipolar world, and this will be true globally as well as regionally with regard to political relationships. It is also true of business, cultural, and social relationships. Temporary networks will spring up inside and between enterprises. For individuals, these first two trends really mean that the world is becoming a place where whom you know and which conversations you were present for are much more important about the influence you will exert than your present job title. The third trend is changing demographic patterns. We will see unprecedented and widespread aging. By 2030, the median ages of the populations in most of Europe, in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan will be older than 45 years. Their economic activity will slow. In areas where the median population rises above 25 years, we'll see lower crime and fewer revolutions. Global migration will increase as both rich and developing countries suffer from workforce shortages. I feel like I need to mention here that I think we're going to see demographic shifts as well in the lawyer population. It's not, I don't mean I think, it's obvious. One thing we always, and this is an ad hoc comment, one thing we always suffer from is thinking that today's problem will be tomorrow's problem. Okay, the fourth trend is the nexus of food, water, and energy. Demand for these will grow substantially due to increasing populations. The demand for food and water will increase by 40% by 2030. But here is the kicker. Growing more food requires more water, and moving water to where the food is requires energy. And growing biofuels requires water and land that would otherwise be used to require food. So tackling any one of these issues involves the others as well. By 2030, see the dark red there? Half of the world's population will live in areas of severe water stress. Fragile states in Africa and Asia will be hard hit, but China and India are also vulnerable. You also see some color over there in the western U.S. Hey, Oklahoma. Hey, Kansas. Hey, wheat states. This nexus will lead us to new technologies and new societal decisions. To paraphrase that unsolicited advice that was offered in that old movie, The Graduate, I just want to say one word to you. Just one word. Water. There's a great future in water. And from the Who Would Have Believed This department, it looks like the U.S. is about to become energy independent, maybe by 2020. Recent shale discoveries have made this possible, and when you add to that the very great likelihood that we're going to start using new oil extraction technologies, and that we're probably going to have to shift in some of our oil policies as a country, we're very likely to even become an exporter. And if that happens, a lot of things could change. Our economy could improve even faster than we're hoping for. We could become energy independent for longer than we had expected. And that's not even to mention what could happen to some of the oil producing companies and even OPEC. These four global trends are interacting with some other forces, and one of the most powerful of those is the force of the non-state actor. Non-state actors are using their great influence to solve global problems and to advance their own agendas. As governments become less effective, institutions and individuals will flex their superior resources and their freedom to act. Non-state actors include both institutions and individuals, and the institutions include megacities, global corporations, IT and communications companies, universities and media companies, and many other kinds as well. Individuals include religious and business leaders, scientists and inventors, and activists and terrorists. All of these folks will leverage their personal relationships, big data analysis, social media, celebrity, and disruptive technologies. They will build networks and patchworks to address the challenges at hand. And as always, there is the threat of exceedingly rare but dire events that could just knock things sideways and cause great disruption. Things like pandemics, solar geomagnetic flares and storms, weapons of mass destruction, more rapid climate change than we have anticipated already. But the truth is that although we can worry about these things, there is really not very much we can do to control or prevent them. So for those of you who enjoy worrying, feel free. On the bright side, there's so much new technology already, coming to us that are going to impact all of our clients and all of the consumers of their goods. These include nanotechnology, 3D printing, robotics, genetically modified organisms, flora and fauna, new composite materials and construction methods, aviation and surface transportation. These are all going to change dramatically in the coming few years. And from the Pollyanna, side of life, every problem that we encounter it has the potential to spur new inventions and new technologies and to create or revolutionize the industries that serve us and whom we as an industry and a profession serve. So let's look practically now at one industry that we do serve. And as I go through these next few slides, I would like for you to listen for how that industry is changing in response to the things that we've just talked about. U.S. healthcare. It's a little different than Canadian healthcare, but U.S. healthcare is one industry that is changing rapidly in response to all of these trends and forces. It is burgeoning because baby boomers are aging. By 2020, these numbers are huge, public and private healthcare spend by 2020 will reach $4.5 trillion. And then by 2025, that spend will equal 25% of U.S. GDP. Healthcare is actually really not just a single industry, but it's a lot of different industries that produces medicines, medical devices, long-term care, hospital services. And so just to be realistic about our conversation now, let's just look at a single one of those, which I want to talk about, which is hospital systems. Hospital services are increasingly funded by the government, but delivered by for-profit companies. Services are diverging into lower-priced commodity services and high-priced, expensive, high-margin services. Boomers are now buying more of those expensive services. As a matter of fact, they are moving to places where they can find good medical care. Something you may not know, and it is relevant, very relevant, is that the largest U.S. hospital system was created by the same people who founded Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now, here's why that's relevant. I'm not talking about supply and demand. Those founders leveraged the value of vertically integrated supply chains and brands. Hospital systems benefit from the same economies of scale found in every fast-growing franchise operation. Okay? We're going to come back to that one. But today, government and private payers are pushing back hard on hospital pricing, as are journalists and consumer activists. See the name down there? Stephen Brill, remember that guy? That was the last printed issue of Time magazine. And it really had a big hit, and it's going to continue to have a big hit. But looming up ahead are large shortages of doctors, nurses, and lots of other medical workers. This tension between lower funding and higher pricing and rising costs will invite the entrance of new technologies and even more buyer changes that will disrupt the industry. This becomes very dynamic. All of this stuff is so interesting. Big hospital systems are mostly run by white men. That may change. Below that, and that includes the general counsel right now. That may change. And below that, on the legal staff, you have much more diversity, many more women, people of color. The people who right now, and I'm saying this is probably true through 2020. The people who hire outside counsel now are mostly Gen X's, and obviously Gen Y's are going to take on more of that responsibility. And most of them who are in-house, most of the lawyers who are in-house in hospital systems are recruited directly from the law firms that work for those companies right now. Hospitals will, for the foreseeable future, again I'm saying 2020, need these kinds of legal services. On the transactional side, again, these hospital systems are consolidating, so we'll need more in M&A services. Securities, antitrust work, lobbying, of course, always lobbying, as long as the government's in charge of the funding. Labor and employment, real estate, intellectual property, and environmental law, of course. On the litigation side, you can read as well as I do, but basically everything from class action to government civil proceedings of all kinds over there. White collar, internal investigations, all of those things. They need a lot of legal services. Right now, they're getting them in-house and from outside counsel. Hospital systems lawyers, in-house lawyers, discuss their issues with themselves. There's a lot of competition, so they don't go out there and blather on about their issues publicly all that much. So I'm going to make a play here for seconding. Savvy firms do keep their lawyers seconded inside the company to gather current intelligence about how their needs are changing. They also create very clear career paths from their firms to their clients so that they can then retain those relationships and safeguard them. But with all the changes that are going on with regulations, boy, do the in-house lawyers need help on what those regulation changes mean, but they have no training budgets to speak of. So anybody who so smart law firms are providing the training immediately and very, very well. When hospital systems grow and have new needs, smart firms add to their own resources. As the company improves its supply chains, and believe me, that's what they work on constantly, firms have to improve their own through LPI and LPM that deliver higher value cost ratios. As the company forces commodity prices lower, smart firms rebalance their own work portfolios from those companies. They will bundle high and low work together, and maybe at least one approach is to offer fixed fees for that bundled work. There are also forces against bundling the work, as I'm sure you well know. They will recruit laterals to the firm who already work for those clients. They will ponder questions like these. If you've got a hospital systems client that's expanding fast, it's protecting its brand, it's having its margins squeezed from three sides: government, buyers, and labor, refining supply chains, and seeking disruptive technologies, which legal services do they need more of and less of? As a client grows larger and more national, how can we as a firm or any other kind of vendor keep those firms that are 5 states away from taking our business away? And here's a very provocative question. If our client has subsidiaries that supply everything from bed linen to bypass surgery, why haven't they created a legal services subsidiary yet? And what's stopping them from doing that? And what could our firm do that would deliver the same services at a competitive price that the subsidiary would deliver? And what can our firm deliver that a subsidiary could not deliver? Regardless of which industries you and your firm serve, these are the kinds of questions that you have to ponder, answer, and then act on and invest in. To sum up, tomorrow's consumers and citizens are going to want and demand more independence and freedom. They reject big command and control structures in favor of flatter, more efficient, even temporary ones. They are living longer and better lives. They need more and cleaner food, water, and energy. And in response, food is already being grown differently. Fossil and green energy industries are transforming themselves. Entertainment and hospitality destinations are going virtual. Cities are becoming denser and more vertical. Telecom is becoming biotelecom. Right now, Detroit and Tokyo are designing and building driverless cars. And all of this change is accelerating. No matter which generation you're from, our clients are going to demand that we give them all the help that they need, and they're going to need an awful, awful lot. So I would like to simply close with a quotation from that great sage of all time, Yogi Berra, who said, "The future ain't what it used to be." Ladies and gentlemen, you have your challenge now in your roundtables. Go out there and figure out how to help your clients. Thank you.